Be sure to follow me on Instagram. There you can hang out with me and talk to me directly. Okay, so I still have a head cold, right? My throat is sore and I've got a whole roll of toilet paper, all right? Basically my tissue paper to blow my nose. I've got my Vaseline to keep my nose from drying out. You can't stop greatness, son. We are picking back up again with absolute carnage. Now, here's the thing, right? Like the last thing we picked up with this, like the Incredible Hulk became the new host for Venom, which was cool. It's really, really awesome to see. Like I definitely dug seeing that. The issue was that it just ended with the Incredible Hulk becoming Venom. So we had no idea what he was capable of. We had no idea what it was that he could do. And the reality of this is we get to see this play out in the next issue, like in this particular issue of Absolute Carnage. But here's the thing about Absolute Carnage. As much as the story is titled Absolute Carnage, it's about Absolute Carnage in so much as he's just the villain who's there. The story's about Eddie Brock. And that's what I really dig about this, right? I mean, of course it has Carnage and of course he's the main villain, and you do get to see like a really good display of his character in terms of how he's handled by Donny Cates. But in reality, I'm not really seeing anything here from Carnage that I haven't seen before. What I like is the evolution of Eddie Brock, and nothing really shows it better than this moment that he has with Peter Parker as soon as it all goes down, right? Because with Eddie losing the Venom symbiote, he's just a guy now, and there's nothing he could do to stop Carnage. I mean, he's hopelessly outmatched against Carnage, and even with Venom, he was still struggling, right? So what little hope he had was basically gone here. Peter Parker himself, the best he can do is bob and weave and dodge Carnage, right? Like using his spider sense to try to get the upper hand, but he can't outright defeat Carnage because of how powerful he is now, right? So, but the cool thing about this is that what you end up having is a really cool, it's actually a really, really great reference here. What ends up happening is Donny Cates references the Jury. Now the Jury, dude, this is an organization I haven't heard of in decades, right? In a long, long time. The Jury was an organization created by David Michelinie and Mark Bagley back in Venom Lethal Protector #2 in 1993 or whenever it was that story came out. And the Jury was actually kind of like this anti-Venom task force is really what it was, right? So the idea behind this was that you had a guy named Orwell Taylor. I think it was Orwell Taylor. Anyway, he was a general in the military. His son was a prison guard, and he was actually a prison guard at an institution that was essentially the Raft before the Raft. It was for supervillains, essentially. And Venom made his escape, and Hugh died in the process. And as a result of that, Orwell ended up gathering together all of Hugh's friends and creating a task force to track down and try to destroy Venom. It didn't succeed, but it was a really cool concept. And the fact that like Donny Cates is going to reach back to like 1993 and say remnants of this group are still around, it's cool. And here's the reason why it's so cool. Here's the reason why this matters, is because what it does is it creates cohesiveness. And cohesiveness is something that oftentimes is lost when it comes to writers crafting stories, especially events that focus on a character that they're taking over, because so much emphasis is put on how they perceive the character that oftentimes like old school stuff is lost. And so it's really cool to see a writer kind of say, hey, look, like remnants of this old school stuff is important here, right? Like it's a significant thing. It matters. It's awesome to see these throwbacks. It's awesome to see these really, really cool moments where it kind of hits back and harkens back to really the old school stories. Now, the other cool thing here, and this is why I say like Donny Cates' handling of Eddie Brock, I think is second to none. This is the single best handling of Eddie Brock that we've ever seen in Marvel Comics. And the reason why is because he sits down and he talks with Peter and he says, I can't protect these guys. You know, I can't do it on my own. Like as a singular guy, I can't do it on my own. And right now it's just you and me, and somebody's got to protect the boys. Somebody's got to keep them safe. That's your job. You stay here, you keep them safe. I'm gonna grab some of this Jury tech, I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna fight off Carnage's doppelganger forces as best I can. This is awesome, because one of the cool things that comes out of this is literally like Eddie Brock gets out there and he's just like, all I hear is the screaming of these Carnage things, but it's almost a little bit of like a reprieve, right? It's almost kind of like Zen-like and peaceful, because he's like, the one thing I don't hear is a voice in my head. I don't hear Venom telling me what to do. I don't hear Venom giving me orders, telling me, Eddie, don't do that. Eddie, you have to run. Like, I don't hear that. It's just me. And he's like, I'm Eddie Brock. Like, I can be a hero. I'm a good guy. And by God, if I'm gonna go down today, I'm gonna go down swinging. Dude, it's one of the coolest moments of his character, like ever in the history of like Eddie Brock. Dude, it's so beast, because what you're talking about here is you're talking about a guy who's basically gone from like an arch enemy of Peter Parker who wanted to kill him to a guy who's now putting the life of his son in the hands of Peter to keep it safe, and is gonna put his life on the line, and knowing full well he might die, get out there and take as many of these Carnage guys down with him as he possibly can. It's a wholesale revamp of Eddie Brock, and that's why I love it so much. That's why it's so awesome, because it's a total reformation of a character who in reality had this coming a long time ago. Like this really should have happened a long time ago, but it's cool to see it happen now. Now, the big question a lot of people had is, how would the Incredible Hulk with the Venom symbiote fare against Carnage? First things first, the Incredible Hulk looks amazing as Venom, right? Like, dude, he looks so beast, and I definitely want to see it make its return. But here's the thing about the Incredible Hulk, all right? We're not talking about about like Doc Green Hulk, right? Like the super genius version of the Incredible Hulk. We're talking about what's essentially the Immortal Hulk, assuming that this falls in line with what's going on with Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk run. This is not the sharpest tool in the shed. Immortal Hulk and Savage Hulk, they're like forces of nature, just like punching and pummeling things, but they're by no means the sharpest tool in the shed. Battle tactics, strategies, these things are lost on the Incredible Hulk in his most pure, savage, and current immortal form. And it's kind of a cool thing to see, because when you end up having Cletus Cassidy, who's been around the block more than a few times and is by no means Captain America, but is by every means more capable than your average superhero, he gets the one-up on him like that in the blink of an eye. And it would be really easy to look at that and say, what a waste, like what a huge colossal waste. But I would say this is really designed to highlight just how capable Carnage is. That even when you have one of the most powerful beings in the Marvel Universe and just sheer physical strength, who puts on a symbiote which amplifies his power even further and still gets taken over by Carnage, it's a sight to behold. It's just like, wow, because what it does is it illustrates the gravity of the situation, and it says, what hope do they have? And all this really begins to come by way of Eddie Brock himself. And the reason why is because using one of the devices that belonged to the jury, which I believe, it wasn't the shocker, I can't remember which one it belonged to, but it's one that emits an electric pulse. What he does is he channels it through Captain America's shield. Now, people who are knowledgeable about Captain America's shield will say, okay, so Captain America's shield is a proto-adamantium / vibranium iron alloy that was created by Myron McClane accidentally, right? Attempts to duplicate Captain America's shield is what led to the creation of pure adamantium, the adamantium that's bonded to Wolverine's skeleton. And so because it's a vibranium alloy, technically speaking, it should basically absorb the electric shock, right? I mean, it could absorb kinetic energy, almost all different forms of energy. It should basically absorb that. But you would look at that and you would say either the shield would absorb it, but it wouldn't like electrocute Miles Morales. At least it's not something that we're familiar with. The answer to that question is actually yes, it can. And the reason why is if you go back and you look at Captain America Comics number 78, 1954, I love being able to pull out little nuggets like this because I feel like people are just like, what? Holy cow, how did this guy know about this? In Captain America Comics number 78, 1954, there was a character who was created called the Electro Monster or something like that. Marvel would reuse the concept later on when they introduced Electro in the Spider-Man comics, but this was a character who was created by the Russians for the purpose of like defeating Captain America. Now, Ed Brubaker's run, all that kind of stuff, not really Steve Rogers, doesn't really matter. The fact remains, when they go and they fire this electric shock at Captain America's shield, what Captain America ends up doing is absorbing it and amplifying it back. Now, we can kind of go with that or we can ignore it. And the reason why is because if you read Ed Brubaker's run on Captain America, basically every version of the character that we saw after the end of World War II was not really Steve Rogers and it was not really Captain America's shield. They were frozen in ice, basically. We found that out in Avengers number 4. So you can ignore it or you can go with it. You can say, well, at the time the story was written, it was Captain America, it was Captain America's shield. It wasn't until we got into the mid-2000s when Ed Brubaker changed all that. So you can do whatever you want with it. You know, you can ignore it or you can choose to go with it. I like the idea of going with it because I think it kind of makes the scene make sense a little bit more. Or you can just say the electricity passed through the shield and it shocked Miles Morales. Doesn't really matter. Regardless of the scenario, because electricity, fire, things like that are weaknesses to symbiotes, and because of the fact that Miles Morales had previously used his Venom Blast to kind of jog Eddie Brock out of being controlled by Carnage, this is basically Eddie Brock recalling that and then using it on Miles and then bringing Miles back. But this is a huge moment because we would look at this and we would say, okay, cool, one more ally to his side, now they have a chance. Miles is just like, dude, we're so screwed. And when the question is like, why? It's like, because literally like the Incredible Hulk taking the Venom symbiote, or at least the Venom symbiote bonding itself to the Incredible Hulk, and then it fighting against Carnage, the Incredible Hulk doesn't have the wherewithal to intellectually overcome Cletus Cassidy. Physically, yes, but all Cletus has to do is outthink him, and that's exactly what happens. When that time comes, Cletus Cassidy is gonna seize control of the Venom symbiote, and when he does, the Venom symbiote's gonna rebond itself to Cletus, and it's gonna amplify his power even more, because each time he takes a codex, he becomes more powerful. And so it's just kind of like, okay, so like literally at that moment, Cletus Cassidy strips the Venom symbiote off of Bruce Banner when he like forces the Incredible Hulk to revert back to Bruce, strips the Venom symbiote off of him, amplifies his power even more, and then essentially just kind of like, no one can stop me now. And for the most part, they can't, right? Like by that point, with the 10-minute window that was bought by Eddie Brock in order to basically allow the superheroes to wake up from their codexes being removed, they jump in as best they can, but they're no match for Cletus Cassidy. I mean, he takes them out with a quickness. Not only that, what we end up learning from Miles is that we're the maker, the Ultimate Universe version of Reed Richards at the beginning of the story, who was basically, you know, who claimed that he was extracting these codices and then destroying them, wasn't doing that. He was actually saving them. He was basically putting them in this great big huge storage device, more or less. And so the result is that like all these codices are there. All Carnage would have to do is break into it. And so the result is that like by all standards of measurement, Cletus Cassidy has more or less won. But what ends up happening here is Eddie Brock seems to make the sacrifice to say, okay, fine, if that's the case, if that's where all the codices are, then let's go get them. And so Eddie Brock, in like this amazing amazing heroic moment. Like he's literally going through and saying all this. He's like under all the noise and under all the chaos and under all the panic and under all like the fear and all this rage and everything that's going on. Like under all of that, I can feel something that I haven't felt in a long time. I can feel hope. And so what he does is he literally breaks into this entire storage facility and basically absorbs all these codices into himself. And when he does, it amplifies his power up higher than it was when he was originally Venom. And then from that point, he basically goes forward and ends up chasing after Cletus Cassidy, at which point the story ends. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, cliffhangers, and I will catch you all later. Peace.